Hi everyone, my name is Sulis. I run Somia Customer Experience. It's a innovation and experience design consultancy. So basically we do research, exploratory research to identify opportunities, to identify directions for the company or for brand or for products. And then we do design, and then we evaluate the design and test it and improve the existing solutions. There's part of the work that we do covers training and workshops and building capacity for design and culture in organization. So yeah, that's basically.
Okay, my name is Maesy. I work with Pulse Lab Jakarta. What Pulse Lab Jakarta is a data innovation lab of the United Nations. And there are 3 data innovation lab of the UN. One is based in New York, the second one in Jakarta, and the third one in Kampala. Our main mandate is to do data science and utilizing the potentials of big data for humanitarian and development action. But Pulse Lab Jakarta is unique because it's the only lab out of the 3 international labs that does human-centered design as well.
I'm Nanda. I work for Kopernik. And what we do at Kopernik is, first we have two focus, technology distribution. By technology distribution, this is more on simple technology but affordable to people in the last mile. So like solar lamps, if you see solar lamps, we distribute them to people in the last mile, NTT, Papua, and currently we're distributing them to the emergency response affected areas.
Yep.
The other focus is on experimentation. So we have two focus. Lean experimentation, it's actually our in-house researchers. We do small-scale experimentation where we pilot them, and then if successful, then we talk about scaling up the product.
Yep.
And the other experimentation is working with clients.
So the background is very different. It's not like from tech companies, not from like startups, but it's more like from agencies. So let's start with the failed stories. Right? What is one project that, because you are more like an agency, like independent team, what is one project that you will never tell your prospective clients when you are pitching to them? Right? If they know that I did this, then they will not want to work with us. So let's start with that, right? And then maybe from that stories, you can also add more like what do you learn and what will you do differently from there.
So this is a project we did in 2017. It's for healthcare. We can't disclose the client's name. It's basically an international healthcare company. They produce medical equipments, big medical equipments for you to do your dialysis. Basically, if you have kidney disease, you have to go to dialysis every 2-3 days a week. They are interested to see, okay, we produce these equipments, can we start moving into a new venture of a service business? Basically, if you want to enter a new business, what should we do? What's the gaps, what's the opportunities? Very exciting project, and we were very excited because the goal at the end of the day was to set up the first so-called like the best design solution for Indonesia that can be scalable for the whole nation. So we started with understanding what is going on, right? So we talked to doctors, internists, nurses, patients, caretakers, nephrologists, people who run clinics in different cities in Indonesia, from Jakarta, Bandung, Surabaya, Bali. We went to Makassar. And to learn like what's going on, what's the problems, what are the gaps. And there's a lot of things that we learn. And from there, we synthesize and we come up with, hey, these are the 5 gaps that's happening. There are these 5 opportunities and 5 different business models that you can go into and tap into the market. Very exciting, client was happy. And then they went to meeting. And then in the meeting, they realized that, hey, like, oh, we have this meeting with a group, with the international stakeholders. And although all of this is good, I think we need more research. okay, maybe we need more depth. So we went on again to the field and tried to dig more and dig
people
more.
Here like, yeah, that was my...
And dig more and dig more. And then we came back, supply, and they were very happy with the results. And then they say, oh, this is good. And then we say, hey, we need to converge because we've been diverging and going very in-depth. We need to start converging on, as a business, what do you want to do, leveraging from your strengths and you know, as a vision and strategy for the business, we need to converge so that we can start, you know, experimenting, prototyping, and iterating and learn from there. And then I said, hang on, okay, we're meeting with the Indonesian Ministry of Health, and let's see what they say from there. And they went for a meeting, and it came back, oh, there's like this new opportunity that we've never, that was not part of this original scope. This new opportunity, and we should go into that on prevention. So okay, and then we start digging more, and we went to Puskesmas, understanding BPJS, understanding all of the different things, Prolani. So if you're into healthcare, you probably understand this. And then it goes on and on and on, and the client were not able to converge and keep delaying the decision on, you know, what should we do next. It was, I think, 2.5 months or 3 months down the road, and the team started to get very insecure. It's like, oh, have we not delivered good insights? Why are they not continuing? Why there was no decision made? They started, you know, when you do research, you understand that after a while, you reach a saturation point where you no longer find new things. Like it's starting to get very repeated, and it feels like the effort that we do when it's starting to get diminishing return on value. And then as a team, we say that, okay, enough is enough. We called the client and said, I think we're gonna pull out from this project.
Ooh.
It was a full 1 year, fully funded project. There's a lot of money. And as a business, we're like, it's a lot of money and we don't have projects after this. We don't know what we're going to do if we stop this, if we stop this next week, we don't know what we're going to do 2 weeks after that. And we don't have pipeline, we don't have anything because this project is supposed to last us for the whole year. I think it's, you know, we started talking about integrity, but I think at the end of the day, we ask questions as, when should we stop and when do we know that, you know, enough is enough? And as, at the time, the decision was, should we sacrifice this client, this project, or should we sacrifice the team's sanity? Yeah. And we chose to sacrifice the client. And I've never mentioned this to anyone who said.
Doesn't sound like a failed story. Untung dia bukan Cina kayak saya. Kalau saya Cina kayak saya, lanjutin terus aja research-nya. More money, come. Luckily, Somia is still having the integrity. So like, enough is enough. I will do different. Money. So, how about the other ones? Nanda and Maesy?
I can also confess. So, this is a story from mid-2017. That's around the time when I first joined Pulse Lab Jakarta. As I mentioned to you earlier, Pulse Lab is known as a data science lab. And at the time, one of Pulse Lab's most successful platforms is a platform called the Haze Gazer. So the idea is that the haze crisis was happening at the time. You know, this almost annual occurrence of slash and burn, resulting in lots of haze and health problems that got Singapore really angry at us a couple of years back.
Yeah, I was in Singapore and we cursed Indonesians so much. Like,
yeah,
hey.
Exactly.
Like, and then the Indonesian will reply, hey Singapura, kalau kita semua orang Jakarta kencingin itu pulau, kamu tenggelam, jangan macam-macam sama kita gitu.
So of course, being a UN agency, that's not the line that we say back to Singapore. And what we did instead was we worked with BMKG, Badan Meteorologi, aku lupa kepanjangannya apa, dan Geospasial. Jadi what they wanted to do at the time is to see whether we can actually see the haze crisis in real time. So what happened at the time was that they got SMSs twice a day to tell them where the fire hotspots are based on the satellite data. But because of the intensity of the disaster at the time, they need to know where the fire hotspots were at real time. So we were able to just get satellite data, open data, mine them, and put them in a dashboard so the information could be done in real time, and also complement it with what people were saying about the haze crisis on Twitter, from Lapor, this government citizen complaint platform. So not only the government could see where the fire hotspots are happening, but also what people were saying about that at the time. So when we were monitoring that, that what people were saying about the haze crisis, we were surprised because, well, if you think about fire burning and there's a lot of smoke, probably you'll complain about not being able to breathe, right? But instead, what we found a lot was people were complaining about schools being closed. So there were more complaints about school closures than there were about people not being able to breathe. So what happened?
Are these Singaporeans?
No.
Oh, Indonesian. Interesting.
These are people in Riau, in Pekanbaru and the areas.
Is
and
it
in
representative
as well.
samples?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe things change.
Yeah, so when we deployed the people who understand qualitative research, and there weren't many at the time in Pulse Lab, we found out that's because, well, when there were haze crisis, the school needs to be closed. But then the announcement came only about an hour after the official school hour starts. So in areas that were worst affected by the haze crisis, yeah, people have to walk for maybe about half an hour or to an hour to get to school. Yep. And yet when they get to school, they will hear that, well, the school is closed for the day, so they have to go back and walk for another hour. And this creates problems for a lot of people. For the teachers, because they can't change the schedule of when the exams would be. It creates problems for the parents because parents were not prepared to take care of the kids. And it creates problems for the kids because, well, they want to be with their friends. They don't want to go home. So what happened was the logic is to close the schools so then kids would go home and become safer from being exposed to haze. But instead, they got even more exposed to haze because they would choose to stay in the school and hang out and play with their friends. So
playing, not studying.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that sounds
That's
familiar,
the reason,
right?
yeah.
There you go. Yeah. So we went back to Jakarta and meet with some organizations who wanted to work on children's education and haze, and some of them were really interested to partner with us to come up with prototypes. So we did. We prototyped a series of interventions. We came up with an idea of a school emergency plan. So what about dividing people into different kind of districts and creating an emergency school system using the village halls or maybe using the mosques? So just an idea of a place that is quite safe, protected from haze, where children could go to school and play with their friends in a safer environment. So we designed all of that. We also designed for delivery, not just what the concept of education would look like. And that's the point where I came in. And when I was really excited, I had seen all of the design briefs, and I was asking, so what happened? Did we ever end up trialing this? Oh, well, yes, we did the trial. That's what the team told me. Okay, so what happened? Did it really get implemented? What's the impact of the haze crisis? And then they went silent, completely silent. And when I asked why, what happened? It's because our partner at the time had changed priorities. They didn't get the funding anymore to actually implement the school emergency plan that we had been prototyping together with them based on this research. So that really gave me a stark and cold reality check on what it means to be doing design research for the development sector. As part of a UN agency and with a lab as a mandate, we don't implement. We're not designed to be implementing things by ourselves. And we were focusing so much on creating the design briefs on what would actually needed to happen if we were to implement the school emergency plans, that we didn't think of the possibility of people not getting their funding or changing priorities. And at the end of the day, what was left of the project were the design briefs. But because the insights were done in a PowerPoint deck way, it's not deep enough for you to send to another organization that weren't with us throughout the process to actually use the insights. So I think this is a failed story because we relied on our partner wanting to deliver, but things are not certain in the development sector. So what we could have done and what we have tried to do afterwards is to really take insights seriously. So instead of focusing only on the design briefs, we also do comprehensive insights report with the aim that other organizations could read about what we find and maybe not do the exact prototypes we wanted, but they can apply to different kinds of use cases.
That's a really good one. I think, but that story feels very similar to our challenge, right? How many of you that you have done like a really thorough research, came back to your companies and tell them, hey, we should build this. But then the company changed the priority and they just make your research. Raise your hand if you face that one.
Not alone.
You can hug each other. I feel you're suffering. But good point from Maesy, right? At least so you can little bit tap your back, like even though that research deck doesn't go to an implementation, but at least it become like a knowledge base that can be used for the next other people or another agency or another research team. That's where our uang pajak go. Research terus nggak diapa-apain habis itu. Last one, Nanda.
So it's more on, my confession is more on our lack of cultural awareness when we do research in a new geographical area.
Yep.
So this is on the, we did a research in 2018, last year, on mapping out the needs of smallholder farmers in 3 provinces, West Kalimantan, Papua, and West Papua. So the research went well. The data collection, field visit, everything went well in the 3 provinces. So to wrap up the research project, we did a dissemination event in each provinces. So in West Kalimantan, we invited the relevant stakeholders like local government, farmers that we interviewed, NGOs, and even middlemen who were involved in the market. And it went well, so we did a workshop. And we replicate the same processes to do in Papua. So that's when things went a little bit wrong, I can say. So due to our lack of cultural awareness, we didn't know that by inviting the relevant stakeholders into one meeting room, it will cause some sort of tension. We knew that after the dissemination event started, and it did at the first session, at the 30 minutes of the first session of the workshop, tension did arise. So local governments were commenting on our research project, and then other targeted groups were commenting back, more like arguing into what the local government authorities were saying. So it wasn't a very good start, because it really sets the mood of the whole workshop. And so that's a big lesson for us. And the other thing is the way, when we present our findings, the way we package it, or the language that we use, might not necessarily translate the same thing to the local people. So I can give you for one example. Our Kopernik tagline says, "Finding what works," in English. I think in English it means, you know what I mean, finding what works. We're trying to find the best potential solution for these farmers. But when you translate it into Indonesian, adalah menemukan solusi terbaik. Nah, yang terjadi adalah satu partisipan came up and said to us, okay, Kopernik, you guys are new here in Papua. We don't even know anything about you. And then suddenly you guys claim that you found the best solution to help the smallholder farmers in Papua. And then we were like, because it wasn't expected at all. Like that wasn't our intention at all. We wanted to disseminate and share our findings, to work together with the local governments and the other stakeholders to choose the best potential solution that we can implement in the future. And then we tried to calm this person down by saying, oh, bukan seperti itu maksud kami, Bapak. We wanted to work together with all the relevant stakeholders here in finding the best solutions. And then that's when tensions calmed a little bit down. And the rest of the dissemination event went well, so it's fine. So here the lessons learned is that we as newbies, Kopernik as newbies in the Papua region, really need to work with local partners, at least local Papuans, to even host the dissemination event. We shouldn't do it ourselves, so that they have someone that they can trust before someone else, like from outside.
What was the reason at that time why your team did not do that preliminary works about knowing the cultural context?
Because during the field visit, during the data collection, we interviewed the same people, and everything was all right. So we thought, oh, the dynamic was just fine. It's just we didn't imagine, like I said again, it's faulty of us. We didn't imagine that if we have these relevant stakeholders in one place, in one meeting room, that will happen.
Yep.
And no one told us that beforehand. So yes.
Anyone in this room who did that too? Because you guys are so confident that you know Indonesian peoples, that you didn't do any preliminary research, secondary research. I did that when I was at Uber. Like when I went to Japan, and I learned first, oh, how is Japan cultures. But going to Surabaya, I know the Surabaya peoples. Going to Jakarta, oh, I know Jakarta peoples. Although like Jakarta that I knew is like Jakarta 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and it was totally different. Sometimes on the things that we think we know, like, or we are very familiar with, then we tend to skip those like rigorous part of the research.
So now our team we know that.
Yeah. So you
next
can
time.
hire Kopernik now. They know, but I think that is like one of the most challenges that we all face: how to translate the research into design. And most of our sometimes the failed story is to do that, right? To make the prototypes, to launch the products based on the research that we did.
I think it's back in 2017 or 2016. There was this market research and prototyping test on portable refrigerator for fish sellers on motorbike in NTT. So we did the market research and identified the needs of the fish sellers, and our client, as the technology developer, developed the prototype. So that's the what you see there. That's the prototype fridge. There's like this wire that's supposed to connect to the motorbike's battery, so that the fridge goes on, like it's on and as a cooling system.
Yep.
Initially, the fish sellers will sell fish in buckets like that. They fill it with ice. I think most of you know this, with ice, but it doesn't last long, and that is very hot. The ice just melts pretty quickly. So that's the reason behind why this product is invented. So here is nothing really wrong with the market research and prototyping test, but the target to launch the product actually never happened because our client, the product developer, found it difficult to incorporate the different needs of the fish sellers into designing the product. So it has been more than 2 years. The product hasn't been launched, and it's been delayed till today. So I guess lessons here is that while we do have a timeline, we know when to launch it, but if things are not possible, it's just not possible.
Since Nanda mentioned about physical product, I want to share about one of our projects on physical products. So the client was one of the top brand of sanitary solution that's based in the US, so it's a worldwide brand. And in 2017, they came to us and say, hey, all sanitary ware or bath solutions that you see here in Asia, it's all from the US. It's all made by Western, for Western. There's no considerations of culture or behaviors of the needs of the Asian countries. And since Indonesia is rising, it's like, oh, Indonesia will be a good market, it's a big market, and can you help us discover and explore what are the opportunities for new product innovations for the Asian market. So it started with exploratory research, really just observing people, what are the problems, and this is very common, and I see some people started laughing when they saw this picture.
How did you take that picture? Did you follow them?
So a lot of things, right? We did observations, we went around, we snowball, asked people. So basically it's very unstructured, and we very quickly discover a couple of areas of opportunities. And we presented to them, and they said, oh, this is really cool, we never know this before. This is very new for them. And they have a big meeting with, again, the international board, and they decided that, hey, out of these 5, it looks like we can go into these 2 areas, because that's what they think that their technology they can tweak some of their existing products to cater for these needs. So instead of recreating new things, they can tweak on something. Okay, that's great. So they decided to work on 2 new product lineups. And since then, we worked with them on testing the concept. So we did like evaluation on the business business case for Indonesia, evaluating with an architect or interior designer who designs space to make sure that whatever new products that they come up with will fit into the Indonesian bath space or public spaces like here or at home residentials. It goes on with the design development or with the product development. You started to get converging from sketches to full mock-ups to working real prototypes, a working prototype. And we started this in 2017. And exactly next week, we are still testing the working prototype. It's like 2 years, right? Wow. And it just took that long for physical products. But I think what I want to share is also the challenges in doing implementation of products like this. First, we're dealing with something that is very private to a lot of people. How do you pee and clean yourself? How do you pass motion and clean yourself? Is the water pressure enough? Is this too much water? Is there a splash? So it's very sensitive. So as a researcher, that was one of the questions that we asked ourselves. We're gonna test this. How are we gonna test this to make sure that we get a result that is accurate without observing in real life?
Maybe camera studies.
Hidden camera.
Hidden camera.
That's the integrity. We did not do that. I will not. Yeah. So, and the second thing is when we are testing real prototypes. So we want to test because, with digital products, you can create hotspots and you can fake it, right? It feels like it's working. But with this, it needs to work because we're testing the water pressure, we're testing the real thing, we are testing how long is the water would flow before it stops, that it's just nice, So it came the complication, how do we test this? Where do we test this? So we rented a house, we hacked the house, we renovated it, we created a lot of fake walls, we connected all the plumbings and everything so that we can install the working prototype so that the water is flowing and everything. And it sounds complicated, but that's just probably 20% of the problem. There's a lot of bug, if you do prototype with InVision, the bug would probably it doesn't click or the hotspot just and then you can quickly shift it around within minutes. This one, sometimes the water leaks. The night before the testing, the whole water tank just got dried up. There's no water, and then you have to call the plumbing. And then the sensor didn't work, and a lot of things. And we had to improvise a lot. So because the session was scheduled, we have to improvise a lot. So in fact, we're supposed to test this coming Monday. Our team is right now still on the side, fixing some stuff, and they're with the plumbers and the clients and trying to get stuff done. And the third complication in this is the prototype was developed in China. And you know how screw up is our custom, right? If you shopped from overseas and trying to get your stuff in, they always have reasons to keep your stuff in the custom. And it happened to us every time we do testing. It's been the fifth round, and one of the prototype right now is still stuck in custom, marked red. Wonder what it is inside.
Yeah, what's that?
Yes, and we just need to go with it. And even I would say, tell story. One of the second round of testing, I remember, last year, custom stuck, participants scheduled. So the night before, we printed life-size drawing using plotter, and let people to role play because we couldn't get the prototype. And the prototype arrived exactly one day after the last testing day. So yeah, I think the story is from research to implementation. Research, the discovery was fun, it's cool, it's nice, you find new opportunities, but when you start dealing with implementation and making things work and you start wanting to test stuff, especially in a non-digital world, it is a lot of complexities, and we have to improvise a lot and learn to deal with whatever we have to still get the data that we need.
I want to highlight the last examples that you gave. I think that one's quite similar to what we may face. For example, like we plan the research to be 1 week, and then we already schedule all the participants to come on the D-Day, but a day before that, the prototype was not ready, right? And then, or the prototype is half-baked. Your example is like you kind of hack it into different prototypes, but the question is, did you still report the findings using that hack?
Yes, the client is on site. The client saw it.
Got it.
But I guess the good thing is also having client on site. They know that it's not you that screwed up. It's like this is just the situation. So as we speak, right, the client right now is in fact creating a foam model to, just in case we cannot release the prototype from custom by Monday.
I see. How about you guys? Do you still continue doing the research with that half-baked prototypes and still report it, or usually you postpone the testing? Okay, I took it as half and half. So what's the product? I'm very curious. Is it still confidential?
It's still confidential.
You should ask me. I know that one product that will be very useful for Indonesian market, for sanitary products. Have you ever heard about this? Portable bidet. Like when you travel outside of Indonesia, it's very hard when you go to the restroom, right? Because there is no water. Bisa bikin lecet. So that things, you can find it in Amazon, like $15. It's perfect, guys. You need to bring it everywhere. Pro tips from me. Okay.
We learned that as well, and through one of the exploratory, they say that the trick is to have the aqua.
Exactly, and then you put some holes, but but there is a modern version of it. I bring it everywhere, biar nggak lecet. Okay, cool. So those are like the failed stories. Now let's move to about the insecurities. But I think because you guys are a very like expert in this field, well-seasoned, PhD doctors, do you actually still face that insecurities for like asking whether my works have some values, whether the research that I did actually makes some impact? Because let's say if I just look at your examples, your research that you did, actually I now question my values. Like I help people to buy things that they don't need, Bukalapak, right? But you guys helping like people in Papua, and so do you actually still feel that insecurities in your projects?
I mean, to be honest, I still do.
Yeah.
And I think it's not necessarily a bad thing to feel that way. It keeps you motivated, really, and it keeps you searching for resources, for references into supporting what you're doing. So if anyone here feels like you're an imposter or questioning your values and what you do, it's okay. I think you feel this way too, and you feel this way too when we were studying. Because PhD is like 4 years, 4 years. So the last 2 years was crazy because first you feel like you keep on asking what's the value of your research, like when this is done. I just only know a tiny bit of a bigger picture, what's going on in the world. And what's worse is after your studies, if you don't move forward from like if you don't implement your recommendations. But again, please do not feel like it's weighing you down. Please take it as a feeling that motivates you even further and further.
Just like you, I also still have insecurities about my work. I think the first measure of insecurity, especially because of our position in the development sector, is whether our research actually makes an impact, whether the recommendations are actually taken up. And because we do the research on issues of inequalities, of poverty, the stake feels much higher. We have taken time from people who can use the time to work and to make money, basically. But instead, they talk to us, they open up their homes, they shared an intimate part of their lives with us, and we turn it into insights, but then for what end, right? So that's the kind of insecurity that I really have, and I still carry on a day-to-day basis. But as you said, it's also my source of motivation. Because sometimes in the context that I work in, people are obsessed with numbers and representation. They forget that humans are also made of behaviors and intrinsic things that you can't quantify, and you need to understand those elements as well to make services that works for them. So that's the biggest insecurity. I don't know whether I should pass on to Sulis, but I can also share another level of insecurity that my team has. So before this talk, I asked my team actually in Pulse Lab, well, there's this interesting topic coming in about failures and insecurities. What are your biggest insecurities working in our team? And they all talked about insecurities when it comes to synthesis, the making sense part of the research, and they all talk about one specific project that we work on. So this project is called After Dark, Safe Travels for Women Who Are Traveling at Night. This project is a collaboration that we did together with UN Women. UN Women is interested in making cities safer for everyone, including women, and they did a study about 1.5 years ago to do a safety audit, basically spotting the places in Jakarta where people feel safest and the least safe. So what they concluded out of the study is that in Jakarta, at the very least, a lot of women would choose to stay home at night because it's not safe to go out unless they're very well off, so they have their own personal drivers, they have their own cars, or they can afford to take Grab, etc. That's the reality. But what are the nuances and how are people feeling when it comes to actually navigating transportation at night? So they came to us to ask that question, and yet when we read the report, we also noticed one other thing. Most of the studies around safe transit and women are quite biased. If you look at most of the studies out there, they will talk about white-collar workers, people like you and I who have an office to go to. They're going to talk about the pain points of being at KRL at rush hour. But what about the women who are traveling at night every day for work? People like those who are working in malls, whose shift ends at 10 p.m., and they might not have the pickup service facility that some hotels have or some factories have, but they do have to navigate public transportation every night to get back. And secondly, Jakarta is a very specific city. What about other places like, there are also big cities in Indonesia, but don't have as comprehensive transportation options like we do in Jakarta. So we decided to go to Semarang, Surabaya, and Medan with UN Women. We did diary studies with the participants. We shadowed them in their different kinds of transportation options to get home. We interviewed them, of course, in-depth interview, etc. But all of my team members said that they feel most insecure when it comes to the synthesis part of this project. And I think that's a good thing. Why? Because one, some of my team members are men. So I think it's really good if men are feeling insecure about how they interpret the data of what women are saying about feeling secure or feeling safe or unsafe when it comes to traveling at night. So I think that's just good self-awareness. Secondly, the researchers are all educated, upper middle class, being very honest. And we're talking about women from working class, right? There's a lot of empathizing that's needed, but we also have to check our privileges lots of the time. Yeah, and also this issue of safe transport is an issue that's quite close to home. So I think it would be a total lie to say that I don't have my personal feelings being invested in this, because not a lot of people have the opportunity to express their concerns and issues about safety, right? So I think to begin with, it's very healthy that these insecurities emerged. So the way that we tried to deal with it was this is very classic researchers as well, was to read a lot of things. So Adri mentioned earlier in his presentation about the importance of literature review, understanding context. I couldn't agree more about it. So we read lots of research that are already available when it comes to women's safety, not just from Indonesia, but how do people research this in other contexts. We also looked up studies and also notes about cognitive biases in research. So things like the serial positioning effect. As a researcher, if you're not careful with how you treat your data and going back to data when you do synthesis, most likely you're going to remember your first interviewee or your last interviewee. But the ones in the middle, you tend to forget. So we looked up articles that talk about these biases and tried to consciously do that. I think the sort of sin that we did in this research is that although we did a lot of readings, we didn't really sit together as a team to talk about specific steps and methods on how we can take all of this reading and consciousness into the way that we interpret the data. That's a homework for our next research. And the other thing that we did to sort of mitigate our insecurity was to position our partner, UN Women, to become peer reviewers. So to tell us if we're being gender insensitive or if we're being classist basically in our research. So yeah, there's a story about insecurities when it comes to this, but like Nanda said, I think it's actually healthy to be quite insecure in what you do.
That's really cool.
I think I want to think about it. Like I want to bring the opposite of insecurities. You know, when you like you say, like you meet the Uber driver, they don't get the meets end, and it happened as well, right? We did some projects for Uber, and some drivers cried, yeah. But I think when we start going there, right, I think within our team we started feeling like, I personally, when I go to field and I see that, it's actually the feeling of grateful, and it is really an eye-opening because not many people are as lucky as we are, and we should be very grateful. And sometimes we complain a lot about everything that, you know, well, how we have to do this, the client is like that, like, oh, like recruiter sucks, you know, like that. But then when you start hearing their stories, on top of the insecurities and on top of the feeling empathize, actually you learn about yourself and you feel so grateful for where you are. And I think that is another learning as researcher, you know, when you go through that emotions and you realize that, yeah, like I'm glad that you had that opportunity of enlightenment and learning about yourself, not only learning about the participants.
You guys, do you got any stories about your sin?
There's this particular project where the team, where we feel we have sinned, but not necessarily like it deteriorates the project. So this is an example of an impact evaluation project we did in Tabanan. It's a community ecotourism village. So what we had to do is we had to assess the project. Yeah, when we started to interview some of the key respondents, the responses were very scripted and very crafted, and you know that they're not telling the truth for some reason. Because before that, obviously the team has already done some observation and talked to other people, and when these key respondents were answering like this, you just don't know what to do with the data. Either you want to include it in your report, but at the same time you know that's not the truth. So we were wondering what should we do in this case. At the same time, we want to keep our integrity as a researcher. We don't want to be biased, and we want to be neutral in analyzing our data. The lessons that we learned here, I think it goes back to what Adri said in the beginning of his presentation, that researchers ought to be creative and to be an observer. Even though you have the key respondents that you need to interview, but look around, look at their neighbors, look at the marketplace, see something from a different angle, from a different perspective that can give you insight and enrich your report and data as well. So when you have that when you display your both of these data, either scripted or not, and you analyze it in a very neutral way, you can still keep your integrity as a researcher in a non-biased way.
Remember the sanitary project that we did? The client was very number driven. Oh, we need to show the client how many % love this prototype versus that. What is the rating for whether they like this design versus the rating on that design. And you know that in qualitative, you ask these questions and you got that ratings and you got that numbers, and it means nothing, right? It's what they say, the feedback was more useful for product development, but sometimes the business wants number. So when we did the report, we're like, oh my God, we missed to collect some of the ratings. What should we do about it? I was like, it's okay. Like, just slap in numbers. They would know.
So that report that you give from Uber?
No, we didn't do that. No, but it was like, and the client was there, like they were there throughout, right? And they knew that some parts were just, it didn't make sense. And we discussed with them and we say that, oh, it didn't make sense. I mean, you're forcing us to put numbers in this. It doesn't make sense. Even like, for example, there's one part, like there are two prototypes and they're asking, should we use capacitive sensor or should we use a manual button sensor? And many people, like most of the respondents, choose the sensor, a capacitive sensor, but we knew that from observation, it's actually have worse impact for them compared to a manual button. But if we present it like that, and they will say, oh, most people like this, then we should go for this, right? But we knew that through observation, that's not true. So in the end, we have to sacrifice, we say it what it is, but we have to supplement with, hey, you have to be very cautious about these numbers because this just number, it doesn't mean anything, and you should do this, and we give the right recommendation. And we thought that we gave the right recommendation. But in some cases, when people ask numbers in qualitative study, if that helps them to believe more and buy in more in the insights that we present, then we just have to do it. I mean, because if not, then maybe they don't want to even use the result. So that's probably some of the scenes that we've done.
Okay, when it comes to scenes, I'll share a story not from Pulse Lab Jakarta, but from my previous job. So before joining Pulse Lab, I was leading a research and innovation unit of a women's empowerment program. And what the program does is to provide funding and support women's rights organizations working on issues related to poverty, social protection access, to violence against women. And one of the things that the innovation unit wanted to do at the time was to introduce human-centered design research to women's rights organizations. They could apply to a funding scheme, and the benefit they would get is that they'll get a primer on human-centered design, how do you prototype, and they actually get the fund and the time, the chance, and the support to prototype and test for about a year what is it that they want to do. And if they're successful, then there will be further funding for scale-up. So I think the sin was being very naive, basically, about several things. Firstly, not realizing that human-centered design actually came from a particular field and a particular background. Human-centered design is mostly applied in private company settings, right? And when you want to translate it into other sectors, humanitarian development, there are going to be tensions. One of the tensions that I found was that the idea of focusing on a user can feel ethically wrong for some of the partners that I had at the time. So how could you choose, for instance, between prioritizing women who are victims of violence in dating relationships and are still in high school versus married women who are being raped by their husbands? So for some organizations, making that kind of choice to begin with feels really wrong. And again, more empathy could be exercised. These are organizations that advocated for all these regulations and laws that we have right now that are making domestic violence wrong. So from that perspective, I do understand where they're coming from and the tensions that they were having. And had I been a bit more sensitive about it, I could have introduced it in a different way to mitigate that kind of tension. Secondly, also being sensitive to the context. Again, these organizations are working with systems all the time. They're trying to change laws. They're trying to change the way government works, the way services are being delivered. Human-centered design, in retrospect, can feel very naive. And yes, again, quoting Adri, I agree, empathy could be overrated at times. What about the incentives that are in place, basically, that are making people, despite their best intentions, just can't do? Or what about the social norms that are preventing you to become more empathetic to women victims of violence, for instance? So, looking back and knowing what I know now, I would have combined human-centered design with systems thinking, the approach that really think about what else is there systematically that influences the way people behave, starting from mental models, social norms, but also laws and regulations, other services that are in place, competing interest. So I think in order to do it well, multidisciplinary perspective should also be used. And thirdly, again, on the issue of context, funding for social issues in Indonesia hasn't always been great, and at the time it was around 2014, 2015, the funding was especially not good. So a lot of organizations wanted to apply, not because they wanted the chance to participate and actually test new ways of working or learning new methods, but because they really need money to survive and continue doing what they do. So even though we have the best intentions, we really said this is a fail-safe environment, ladies and gentlemen, mostly ladies. But yeah, well, the situation is they are relying on the prototypes being successful, so they would get another round of funding. So no matter what you say, no matter what the methodology should allow you to do, also think about the systems that are in place that are setting up the incentives. So yeah, I think the biggest sin would be too naive, I think, in my early days of using and trying to apply human-centered design to the development sector. There are lots of adjustments that are needed, and it cannot stand alone. Systems thinking is definitely needed. I just want to say thank you for listening and for allowing us to share very personal stories of failures, sins, insecurities. Yeah, hopefully there's something that you can learn, and I feel lucky to be able to share it in a space that feels really safe. So yeah, thanks for listening, and if you have stories, looking forward to hear them as well.
Thank you so much. Give a round of applause for these three guys.
Buka aja, buka lapak.